Iowa City is a unique community. This uniqueness is shaped by the people who contribute their ideas, their time, and their energy to the life of Iowa City and the university. Welcome to a series of biographical interviews of special women and men who have affected this community. Their contributions have been valuable, their lives creative and full. What brought them here? Who influenced them? What contributions are they the most pleased about? These and other questions will be explored during this series of interviews entitled, Tell Me Your Story. The story you will hear today is that of Lolly Eggers, the director of the Iowa City Public Library, a library that has a national reputation for excellence. Under Lolly's leadership and with her vision, many exciting changes have been made. New technologies introduced, a usage explosion, a new home for the library, a foundation started, and a National Endowment for the Humanities grant awarded. But Lolly affected this community long before she entered library school in the mid-60s. She worked diligently for social and political change. Lolly's efforts were focused on building a new county home, keeping council manager form of government in Iowa City, instituting a fair housing law, and seeing that the Equal Opportunity Employment Act was upheld. And during these times of change, growth, debate, and activism, Lolly maintained her dignity, integrity, modesty, and sense of humor. She is a wife, a mother of 3, and a grandmother. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, Lolly.
Thank you.
Your story begins, I know, you were born in Omaha and you grew up in Des Moines. As a high schooler, were you interested in books and study, or was it a little political activism, or was it just kind of typical things?
I wasn't politically active, certainly. I was interested in books. I was editor of the high school paper. I was in, both social and bookish things. Did the gamut.
And then you left Des Moines and you went to Grinnell College.
Right.
And what did you study there?
I was American Civilization major. And all my life I've been a fond alumni of Grinnell and have spent a lot of time helping when I can help the college, and we always go back for reunions and so forth. So Grinnell is an important part of my story.
So when you say you help Grinnell, you mean by...
Well, I've been on the Alumni Council, and I've helped recruit students here in Iowa City a few years ago. I'm sort of one of those first generation in my family to attend college, and got good advice in high school. To pick a good college, I didn't know enough on my own to know.
Who advised you?
The women's advisor, can't remember exactly her name, but the women's advisor at high school happened to be a Grinnell graduate, and she led me there. I got a scholarship, and I just always felt lucky because I didn't know enough to know what a good school I was getting into, and Grinnell College is a door opener. It's nice to be able to say you graduated from there.
Part of your story, too, besides your love of Grinnell and getting such a wonderful education there, was you met your future husband.
That's
There's
right.
a story in that, Lolly.
Yes, and it's one I like to tell. One time in my life, I went out with a friend to play golf, and that's where Dell saw me, and he called me up, and that's where our romance started. And I've probably played golf once since then. So if anyone who knows my husband knows that golf is one of the loves of his life, and he still spends a lot of time golfing. And the only thing I can tell him is that I gave him 3 sons, and so he sort of has his own foursome, but he had to count me out.
That's a great story. What brought you to Iowa City?
Dell's job. He graduated from Grinnell before I did, and he was working with Sears, and we got married, and I came here. I didn't have a lot of direction, I would say, in my life at that time.
Well, when you first came, though, to Iowa City, you worked for the Press-Citizen.
Right. Again, lucky I didn't. It was a job I could get. I mean, there was a job opening and I took it. Came a little late in the fall, and in the fall there aren't a lot of jobs, and this was one of them. And my first job there was taking the proof of advertising copy around to the various merchants. So I got an interesting introduction to Iowa City from kind of the other end. I mean, you just kind of came in and you were kind of a nobody, and you took it to the director or the manager or so forth of the store, and you kind of got some interesting insights. The thing I remember the most are the grocery stores. Every Thursday was grocery ad day. And Milo Pacina and George Riebel and the Bravermans. I just remember there were so many grocery stores in those days, and they were a great bunch of people. And since you went there every Thursday, you kind of got to know them. And somebody ought to do a history of the grocery stores of Iowa City, because there were lots of colorful ones. Koza and McAllister. I just can think of all the places downtown there used to be grocery stores. The White Way, they're all gone now.
So when did you get involved in the community in like League of Women Voters and like your involvement with the new county home? Tell me about that.
Well, I think in the 50s I was busy with small children, and I was more interested in intellectual pursuits and reading. I was a member of AAUW and started a book discussion group. And interestingly enough, I think I became political active, except for the home, which was an issue that came up with a bridge club I belonged to, and we found out the need and we got involved. But that really wasn't typical of the things I was doing in the 50s. I was reading the Saturday Review, and I guess if there's somebody who's had a large influence in my life, it might be Norman Cousins, because I was reading the Saturday Review to read book reviews and read about literature, and he was editorializing every week about the peace movement and the dangers of nuclear war. And then about that same time when Kennedy was elected, here was a figure who intrigued me and I could relate to. And I think those are the kind of things that in the early 60s then moved me into being more political and more active in the community in a serving social and political way.
Now there was a movement to change the local government.
Yes, that was in the early 60s, I think. There was a vote to remove council-manager government, and that was certainly under the aegis of the League, and I helped with that campaign to keep council-manager government in Iowa City.
I think the city's been happy ever since.
I think so, yes, right. It's a good form of government, and it's now kind of proven to be the most common form of government.
Also in your League involvement, and was this under the League, there was no equal housing, Fair Housing Act on the books.
Early 60s, fair housing was just a new concept. And Iowa City was one of the first cities in the Midwest to pass a fair housing law. And we worked very hard on that. We held workshops. First we did a big survey, and we surveyed all the landlords in town, and it fell to my job to add them all up and come up with the statistics about how many people were willing to vote regardless of race and creed and so forth. And some of that was a little bit disturbing. And so then we decided we needed an ordinance, and I worked with people who knew more about the legal side of it than I did, but I worked with the League giving workshops and educating people about what these issues were. And then we helped with the campaign to convince the council to pass such an ordinance.
And there wasn't one in the Midwest?
It was one of the first ones in the Midwest. It's been too long now, I can't remember. We were one of the first people to pass, Iowa City was. And as Iowa City has been first in many things.
The other thing you were involved in too, before you, maybe this was at the time you entered library school, but there was this, I read about that you were involved in the Equal Opportunities Act.
Right. In the 60s, first were things like fair housing, and I got introduced through the peace movement and so forth, and then the civil rights movement came along. By the end of the 60s and the early 70s, the women's issues were coming to the forefront, and I think that really energized me, probably more than any other issue, because I was personally involved. I mean, I could really identify with that. And there were a core of women who were working on we started the Johnson County Council on the Status of Women, and some of us were involved with the founding of the Iowa Women's Political Caucus, which was one of the first of that organizations. Iowa was one of the first states to have a large organization. And we worked on a lot of things, simple things, like getting dual listings in the telephone directory, so you could find out, you only know Mary Jones, and she's in the directory as Mrs. John Jones, and she's invisible. And we tried to work with the telephone company on that. We worked with banks trying to get them to give credit to women, because women alone, that was a long issue, and this was early on, but one of the first times when we tried to say, you know, women need to have, be able to get credit. So then those kind of things came first. And then when Iowa City
Was it the meter maids?
Well, it was broader than that. Then we decided that there really was, by then I was working for the public library, and there really was a great disparity between the jobs that women held and the jobs that men held. It was that way every place in those days. Iowa City wasn't any better or any worse than a lot of other places, but we were employees, and so we simply asked for a list of all the employees of the city and giving us their sex, their classification, and their pay range. And out of that, you could put together some pretty damning statistics about the women were at the lower end of the classification pay, and a meter maid was paid 5 or 6 ranks lower than a water meter reader who happened to be a male, or people that had to have high school and college educations for women's jobs were paid less than an 8th grade education required for a laborer. And there were just terrible disparities. Plus, men were paid beyond the pay scale, and there were no women in that category. So it was. We just simply put the statistics together and filed a class action suit.
And?
Well, they got an agreement that the city had to increase the number of women in the workforce, and that they had to recruit women strongly for the next 3 management openings, and they did a reclassification and moved women around, and that's, you know.
So that made a difference,
it made a big difference, right.
Got it, the tension. Well, Lally, my goodness, you were having such success in all these fields. What made you decide to go into library school?
I've thought about that, and I know that by the time I went, I'd been wanting to do it for quite a while. I don't know exactly when it started. I've always been interested in libraries. I used the library from a small child. I was going to a library when I was a little girl, in which I thought the librarian lived upstairs. It was across the street from my church, and it was an old home. And I carried that around and told that as a funny story for many years. And then one time in Des Moines, I was invited there to give a talk to the Des Moines Public Library staff and told the story. And they came up afterwards and said, indeed, that's true. 2 elderly sisters ran that library, and they lived upstairs. So that
you were right.
So I was right. But I used to play library when I was a little girl. But then there were many years intervening that I didn't think much about it. So I've always been intrigued by libraries. I was intrigued by the University of Iowa Library, and I came here and went to school, to the library school, the first fall that the library school opened. So it was the first opportunity that I had in the fall of '67, I think it was, to get a degree. And I sort of thought, well, in this town, I'll probably end up at the university, because that's where most of the librarians are.
But you didn't. You came to work right away from the Iowa City Public Library, and just a few years after that, you were made a director.
Well, lots of lucky breaks and openings, I guess. And you know, I've been director since June of '74, and was named permanent director the following spring.
Lally, over the past 20 years, since you got your degree in library science, master's in library science, what changes, significant changes, have you seen not only in this library, but libraries in general across the nation?
Well, I think the first thing you think of is technology, because automation has made such a big difference in the way libraries deal with the public and the kind of information both that we can keep track of. A lot of the tedious chores that a library has always had about checking in and out of books and keeping track of overdues and so forth. It's necessary, but it was routine work, and the computer has freed the library staff to do that in a better way, and given them aid there. And then the same way, the kind of technology that we now use to create an automated online catalog, that is another way that has helped the public, because they get a lot more information out of the catalog. Although I realize everybody in town doesn't love our catalog, and it's like all technological change. It takes a while, and the older people, the people who are used to the old ways, are those who have trouble with it, and I understand that. So technology is still just churning in libraries. There are a lot of new ways that we're going to get information from the optical media like CD-ROM, Laserdisc, where a lot of information can be put on a little tiny disc instead of in print form, or online databases that we can call up by phone in our computer and get information for the public. So those kind of technological changes are one big change. I think the other big change is the changing of the library from a book-oriented center to an information center, and the information may be in one of many forms. That it could be a book, but it also could be a videotape, or a recording, or slides, or it can be a video studio or a video service right in the library. Why? Because we're in the information business, and this is another way that we get information out to the public. We feel the same way about our meeting rooms, that's another form in which information is organized and distributed to people. So I think the biggest change as far as AV is the videotape. because, and I'm not talking just about movies, which are popular and kind of equate with fiction, which has always been a popular recreational part of libraries, but the nonfiction videos, which are becoming a larger and larger collection, because the kind of argument that we used to use to say why we needed these in libraries is, you would say, well then it's all right to have a book on Brezhnev, but not a videotape to see him dance, or to have music, a book about Mozart, but not have the music. And that, pretty soon, that really lets people it gives them a clue to the book-oriented people, and heaven knows we have a lot of book-oriented people, thank goodness, in this town. So seeking the balance between the new formats, the new AV formats, and the printed word is one that every library has dealt with. We've dealt with it a lot here, and I think that's one of the big changes. And the third big change is the change in demographics and the educational level of the people. We have so many more people using libraries because everybody has a higher level of education, and this is the information age, the information economy. People use media of all sorts. They've had it all their lives. And so the library is just as natural environment as it could be, whereas a generation or two ago, there were certain people who would just never feel comfortable in a library. It was just about Shakespeare and poetry and those things they weren't interested in.
Looking back over your 15 years of being a director, what do you consider your greatest successes? You know, you're going to have to blow your horn a little bit, Lolly.
Well, I think of two right away. One is the building of this building. That is an experience I'll never forget, and it's always will be. I mean, it'll be here for a long time, and it's no question, it's very satisfying to say I had something to do with the design and the building of this building. The experience was exciting too, the working with the staff and the architect and the board and making all the decisions that have to be made.
And there was opposition to it, though, wasn't it?
Yes, that came before. That was, for the referendum. That was an exciting stage, and the community did positively say they wanted a new library at that time. And so after that stage, the really planning and constructing of the building was the most exciting part for me. The number of decisions that it takes to build any kind of building is just overwhelming. I had built a home, so I had a little sense of it. But by the time I was through, it's like now you know what you need to know, what you didn't know when you started, moving from one technology and one specialist to the other and trying to learn their jargon fast enough to be able to find out about lighting and HVAC systems and all the hundreds of things that you have to decide. I always tell the story of Connie Tiffany, who was the assistant director, and I, who stayed up almost all one night trying to decide which way the door should lock. Should the door lock from this side? And just, you had to figure out all the traffic patterns to figure out what the door locking system should be and who should have what level of locking and what keys and so forth. It's just an example of the little things it takes to put a building together.
That must have been quite a day for you to see people physically moving the library over.
Yes, it was. Moving the library, that was a wonderful time. And we have that on videotape. And that was a real exciting project, and volunteers that just came in by the hundreds and helped us, and it was very well organized, and it worked.
And then the next year, after the building was built, you were awarded an Economic Development Award.
Yes, there were so many people coming downtown to see the library and coming from out of town to see the library. And people were coming down and they wanted us to get open on Sunday because we were bringing people to downtown Iowa City. So the Chamber of Commerce gave us an Economic Development Award that year.
So the new building, Economic Development Award.
I would say the NEH grant was something that I'll always be very proud of and very pleased. That was a real honor for this library, for the National Endowment for the Humanities, to recognize the argument that we made and to give us $125,000 in return for raising the matching fund. And so it started our whole endowment fund. But I was most pleased that they bought our argument, which was that the library, the public library in many communities is the only humanities institution there is, in hundreds of communities, not Iowa City, but in many communities. And the teachers and the ministers and the the newspaper editors, these people that's where they have their access. Or ask a lot of humanities scholars where they first got their ideas about being in the world of learning, and they'll talk about their first library or their first public librarian and so forth. And so I wanted to stress how important the public library, the small and medium-sized public library as a unit is. And then we said, and in this town, a lot of people come into this town for short term as students, as library students, as faculty. And let's show them what a good library can be, and then they can take those ideas and go wherever they go in the country and say, we can make a better library in our community. And that was the argument that we used, and I think that was the basis on which they gave us the award.
And we were one of the smaller libraries to receive this award.
Right. Most of the smaller libraries that have received it is because they have a building worth saving, an architecturally interesting building, and they've gotten money to reconstruct or rehabilitate the building. I think we're one of the smallest to get an award just on the basis that we were doing meaningful things in the humanities, and that the library as a humanities institution, a small public library.
Well, I would think if you polled your staff, they would come up with a lot more things that has happened under your directorship. This library is sought after for people from other countries who come and want to visit.
It's been on the list that the ALA gives out on interesting libraries to visit when foreign visitors come.
So it's on one of the, we're one of the 10 on a list, correct? What are your feelings about the technology that's happened under your directorship in the library? You feel good about that?
I feel good about it. I think it's getting harder and harder to keep up. We were ahead in 1980 when we were the first public library in the country to have an online catalog. And that was kind of a heady time. People were asking us to come and talk about it, and it was an interesting thing to do. But in the meantime, a lot of people have learned from us and other libraries, and we're already in stage 2 of our catalog, which wasn't necessarily one of the first in any way. And the costs of technology are high. I think they're worth it, but it becomes a treadmill of keeping up with the new things. And so I think we're still doing okay, but it's going to be hard to, we may never be #1 again like we were for a few years when we had a new building with a new online catalog and a building built, one of the first built to incorporate AV material as a real core part of the building, not just as most older library buildings were built books. And so anytime you had any other kinds of things, what do we do? They're special. So we had to come to terms with those things in building.
Another unique thing that I think that you must do that I've read that a lot of libraries don't is this long-range planning.
We do long-range planning, and we've had 2 long-range plans, 2 5-year plans. Other libraries are encouraged to do it, and many more do it now. We did the first one in the early 80s. And I think that is important, that plans are made to be changed, but on the other hand, once you have a plan in order, and we've involved the community and the board and the staff in making those plans, it gives you a roadmap, and so that every time an opportunity comes, you know which way to turn. You don't always, the trip isn't always how you planned it, but at least you go towards your destination, and when you have a choice, you say, well, that's in our plan, so we go this way, not that way. And that's a learning process for the staff and for the board and for the community that come in and help you with that. And it's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it.
What about your frustrations over the last 15 years?
Well, of course, there's never enough money, and this library is supported well. The city has been generous with its tax support, and we've gone out and found other ways of support, and we have volunteers, and so we have a good support system. But a library is a bottomless pit, and there are so many things that you want to have, and
more and more people are coming through the doors.
And more and more people are using, and so you have to spend a lot of time saying what's the best way to spend your money, and what's the best way to display your goods and get your books, your things reshelved so people have adequate access. So the frustration is that there's always too much to do, and that there are so many things you want to do, and I guess I find now as I get older, it sort of struck me on about my 60th birthday that I'm not going to have time to do all the things that I used to say, well, someday I'm going to do that, and now I have to accept that I'm not going to get to some of those things.
Well, when budgets get tight and the institution needs are many, there's always seems to be a cry that libraries should charge a fee for service. What's your philosophy on a free public library, Lally?
I think it's one of the most important institutions in our society. We have a society that believes in everyone participating, in the informed voter, and that goes hand in hand with getting information in free information to everybody who wants it, no matter what their economic level, and now no matter what their ability. And so there's just something that I would not want to have to ever make a compromise with. I think that the free service is so important that indeed that's why the library got into fundraising, so we could have more at the library without having to charge for it. And we have a glorious history in this country about the free public library. In fact, public almost infers free. The reason we call them public libraries is because there used to be private libraries and they cost money. So free and public to me are equal. It doesn't mean it doesn't cost money someplace, a society. I mean, it's a nice institution where we all pool our money and we get things that none of us could afford. We couldn't afford the books in the library. We couldn't afford anything that a library has if we all had to buy our own. And so it makes so much sense. And since we're all pooling our funds to do it, it's got to be free.
Great. Looking back, what event or person had a major influence on you?
Well, that's a hard one. I don't think of any one person. But if I look at my growth, my personal growth in Iowa City, it's coming to the recognition that I'm a woman and that women have special, not special, but unique qualities and their own value that I don't think that we were, in my generation, we were as aware of as we should have. And so the wonderful, wonderful women that I have worked with at this library and in some of the events that I did previous to the library and some community service, it just never ceases to amaze me how much talent there is out there that for so many years society didn't utilize. I like to look back and think of women when I was in the League. All our current legislators were League members. Minette Doder, Jean Lloyd Jones, Mary Newhouser. We were all in the League together. And those and many other women that I could cite if we could take the time to do the history have gone out and are making decisions in this community and leading the community. And that switch has been fascinating to watch. And then just the feeling that I have with the women I work with. Not that there aren't some tremendous men on our staff too, but that camaraderie of working with women has been an influential part of my life.
Well, there's always life after a job well done, and I'm not saying you're retiring, but as you look down this decade, what would you like to do after you leave the directorship of the library? Have you had much time to think about it?
I thought about it a little bit. I would like to have time to do the standard things, more reading, you know, get to Hampshire more often and all the other things in Iowa City that sometimes I'm just too tired. I can't go at the same pace I used to 10 years ago, and by the time I'm through here, I'm tired. And so every once in a while I feel like, you know, I've got to find time in my life to do some of the things that I keep saying I want to do. My husband and I like to travel. Recently we've been exploring the Southwest, and we were very intrigued with that as a place to spend time, although I don't think we would ever leave Iowa City permanently. That we're too tied to that community. There are some boards I would be interested in serving on. I think it would be interesting after many years of working for a library board, and I'm real interested in the board administrator relationship. It would be interesting to be on a board, in a policy-making board after, which I haven't really been on for many, many years. And so there's hundreds of things I'd like to do.
If you just have that
just have the time and the energy.
And the energy. Something very nice happened to you just recently. Your library staff has nominated you for Librarian of the Year for the very prestigious Library Journal. That came as a complete surprise and one that you should feel remarkable about.
I'm very honored about that. There are many wonderful librarians out there, and I'm sure there will be other people that will receive that award, but the fact that they thought of it and that they wrote that very nice recommendation I shall never forget. And it just gives me an opportunity to say I think that's one of the best things about this library, is that we have had this wonderful, glorious staff, and we work well together, and everybody has an opportunity to participate. And it's all those ideas coming together that has made this a good library. No one person could ever begin to do the things we've done, and I think that they are just another example of what a great group, what a great and talented group they are.
My last question is, since you make libraries sound so exciting, which they are, and being a librarian is such a satisfying career, what do you say when young men and women come to you and say, I want to be a librarian? I like to read, or, I mean, what is it, what advice do you give them, or do you?
Well, I guess I do sometimes. I tell them, remember, if you're going to be a library director, that you're going to spend more time managing the library than you are looking at the books or getting to select them. But that the library is such a wonderful array. Every subject in the world is available there, and we do so many different things that the public library especially is an idea that you can get caught up in and really enjoy. But there are mundane tasks too. I like to tell young library students, you know, you got to be able to unplunge a toilet as well as buy your set of Shakespeare, because the whole gamut of things are there. It's an exciting place to be, and I would recommend it to anybody unless they were hoping to get themselves in a corner and not meet the public and simply be the bookworm kind of person. You aren't going to find that in a public library, because you're serving people of all ages and all backgrounds, and it's that rich combination of people and the resources that you're bringing them together. That's the excitement of the public library, and I would recommend it to anybody who had both of those interests.
I can see you've enjoyed and loved your job.
I certainly have, yes.
Thanks for being my guest.
Thank you.
My guest has been Lolly Eggers, director of the Iowa City Public Library. Her professionalism, her leadership, her vision has shaped the public library. It's a library which we all can be proud of for its efficiency, its excitement, its excellence, and national reputation. Lolly's work in the 60s as an active member of the League of Women Voters helped institute changes in local government reform, a fair housing law. Through her efforts and those of others, referendums produced a new county home, an addition to the old library, and eventually a new library building. She has seen to it that the Equal Opportunity Act was upheld. Here is an Iowa Citian whose imprint is on a myriad of institutions and issues. She has made a difference, and we thank her for her energy and vision in helping make Iowa City such a unique community.